Aviation Collective. So many new faces, or people who probably know what we do and have been around for a while but haven't been to a fireside chat in a bit, or are excited to come see our friend Dick tonight. So I'm so excited that you guys are here. I really appreciate it. This is the time where we come together as a community. We hear the amazing life journeys and stories of really cool people who live right here in our town. Some of them you might not have known. Some of them, they might be this living legend that's like hiding up in the mountains and like comes down like the Grinch once a year, and we want to hear their story. Or maybe they are a really successful entrepreneur, one of our favorite small business owners, maybe a civic leader, anything like that. Someone who really has taken control over their own life, written the story that they want for their lives, and are contributing beauty and value to our community. And we want to celebrate that. But we also want to demystify that sense of success that they have. We want to share with you that everyone's gone through trials and errors. Everyone has come from all different backgrounds. People have learned hard lessons and awesome lessons that brought them to a place that they never expected. And you are more than welcome to do that for your own life as well, and hopefully take away some inspiration from these chats. So that's the purpose of tonight. I want to welcome our guest tonight. This is Dick Rutan. If you don't know Dick Rutan, he is a legendary engineer and pilot. He was in the Air Force. He has flown in 2 international wars. He is the legendary Voyager pilot, and he also has multiple different awards given to him by President Ronald Reagan, a Purple Heart, and many other things that I'm sure we'll get into tonight. So please give a very big welcome and round of applause for Dick Rutan. Thank you so much. How's it going? How are you tonight?
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. So I don't know if any of you guys know, my name's Kurt, or Kirsten, I go by Kurt. This week is my 1 year with the Innovation Collective. It's been a really exciting year. A lot of my regulars here and other people, thank you so much. It's been really, really amazing. But super full circle moment. Last year, I was just starting, and our fireside chat was none other than Bert Rutan, Dick's younger brother. Bert, would you like to give us a wave? This is Bert Rutan, legendary aerospace engineer. Packed house, just like this, an amazing chat. And so it's so cool to know that we have like this really amazing, world-changing family just residing here in Coeur d'Alene, because they know this is the place to be. So super exciting that you're here tonight. So let's get started with the chat. What was that?
Do you want me to do the light?
Oh, not yet. No. Yeah, thank you. We may show some photos and some videos, so we'll turn off the lights when those happen, but those will kind of go throughout the chat. So I'd like to start with, can you tell us where are you originally from? And we're going to kind of start about your childhood, how you were as a little guy, where you came from, how you came up in this world, what's your family look like?
Okay, well, we can talk about that.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Where are you from originally?
Hey, well, great. This is really exciting. You all come out to hear an old retired fighter pilot. And adventure is the essence of life. And, to go where no man has gone before. You ever wonder where that is? I found out. It's in the ladies' latrine in the space shuttle. Anyway, I was just walking in the door, come around the corner, and somebody come up to me and says, hey, I know who you are. Your name is Bert Rutan. And I says, no, but I used to sleep with him. Bert Rutan. Anyway, I want to introduce my wife, Kristen's my wife, and we've been here about 2 years. And you can't believe, stand up, Chris, and you can't believe how happy we are.
Behind every amazing man, there's an even more amazing woman, right?
To be the hell out of Mexifornia.
So, my question. Where are you originally from?
Oh, from California. I was born in California.
Where at?
and Loma Linda, California. And my dad was he was a farmer. And then he went to, at the end of the war, he got drafted. And he was drafted and he was assigned to a place called Farragut, Naval Air Station, right up here, right up the road. So I can say I've been here since 1945 in a place called Apple. So I'm not a carpetbagger, I'm just a returnee.
So you said your father was in the Navy, you said?
Well, he was in the Navy, and after the war, he took advantage of the GI Bill and became a dentist. And he moved his family, after dental school, he moved his family up to a great little town called Dinuba. And it's in the Central Valley of California, just close to Fresno. And it's one heck of a way to grow up.
Very cool. How many siblings do you have? Is it just you and Bert?
Well, let's see, 2 siblings, my brother, Bert, and myself. I'm the oldest, by the way. And Bert's the youngest. And someplace in this world we have a sister. Her name is Nell. And although that Bert and I are pilots and we've flown a lot, our sister probably has more airtime than we do because she was a stewardess. Is that what, can you say that? for American Airlines for a whole tour.
Wow.
You're all in the air.
Yeah. So where do you think, so clearly you all have a huge interest around the air, around flying, all aviation in general. Where did that stem from? Was there an activity you guys did as kids?
Well, an interest in aviation. I think it was, it's been said that my brother and I, we were born without birth certificates. We were born with flight plans. And both of us have aviation fuel in our veins. And right after the war, my mother took a little kid, which is me, out to a place called Fleabog Airport and gave me a ride in the back of a J5 Piper Cub. And that's when somebody comes out and props it over and makes it run, and the tires were smooth. And I sat up there and we had about a 15-minute flight out over Riverside, California. And that little kid, when he looked down, would change his life forever. He was a total fascination from aviation, unfortunately at the expense of a more rounded character development. So we knew a lot about airplanes. But the thing is that everybody grows up, and when they finally get to the point that they're no longer pooping in their diapers or sucking on a nice nipple or whatever, and you realize that there's a world. And it's a big rock going around the sun, and you look around and you find out that there's other things to do and people, and you only have a short period of time to live on this planet Earth. And then you try to figure out, what would you like to do? You want to be a fireman or a princess? Well, I can't do that. But I looked around and I came to the conclusion that I would like to do something significant in my life, having done it as a pilot. And another thing that was very impressionable, it was right after World War II, and we became fascinated with all those heroes of World War II that fought in the skies of Nazi Germany or the Pacific. And became very fascinated with these warriors and about the things that they do. I mean, how can people do the things they do? How can you be part of a squadron that goes out to fly and bomb whatever, and you're the only guy that comes back? And how do you get in an airplane the next day and do that all over again? Became fascinated with those people. And so finally it come to the point that I thought, I wonder if little Dick Rutan could do that. Could he be that brave? And all of a sudden had to find out. Now, all of us are in the world of competition. We're all competitive, right? We play all kinds of games and sports. But as a warrior, there is one competition that's what I call it's the pinnacle of competition, and that is for one's life. And then for some reason, it became fascinated with those heroes of World War II, and I wanted to become a warrior. And about halfway through high school, there in Fresno, California, the very first display of a very famous airplane. And it was an F-100 Super Sabre. Now this airplane is a single seat, swept wings, and it was the very first airplane, the very first jet fighter that we had that could exceed the speed of sound in level flight. And this little kid, this little high school kid, stood in front of that airplane one day, and he looked up and he vowed, someday, I'm gonna fly that airplane in combat. And to fast forward to 19 to a rowdy officers club in Phoenix, Arizona, called Luke Air Force Base. And it was in 1967, and the Vietnam War was just clanking up. And that day, that afternoon, or that evening, there was a whole bunch of rowdy fighter pilots. Some of them had just returned from combat in Vietnam, and those of us who had just finished our gunnery school class, we were on our way to Vietnam in high adventure. And all of a sudden, looking back at all these people drinking and carousing around like people do, that you get kind of rowdy when you know that maybe you may not survive this. But I stood back in a corner and I looked at that and I surveyed that thing, and I thought that in my pocket right now, I had orders to a place called Phu Cat in the Republic of Vietnam as a fighter pilot. And I stood back and I thought about it just for a minute, and I thought that there was not another place on planet Earth that I'd rather be at that moment in time. In a little bit of time, this little kid is going to find out whether he can be a warrior or not.
So, you had this innate feeling of wanting to be a warrior. You saw this plane from a young age, and you knew it was your destiny. Let's stay in that area for a minute. From being a young kid with fascination, where did you go to college, and did you stay in those footsteps of going to flight school or anything like that?
Well, she asked if we went to college, and just to differentiate between my brother and I, for some reason the DNA between the two sibling brothers, one was gifted with a very talent of learning and innovation and creativity. And the older brother was kind of denied with that, had a learning disability, and he struggled quite a bit in school. But there was one thing that he did damn well, and that he was a superhero fighter pilot, and that was my talent. I did not, to be a warrior, I couldn't wait to go. And it turned out, long story short, is that right out of high school, I joined in the U.S. Air Force, spent 20 years in the Air Force. And, education.
I saw.
My education was, I do have a Bachelor of Science, and I attained that not going through a college where most of you that had the opportunity to go to college, chasing girls and drinking beer, right? Well, my college was sitting on a one thermonuclear hydrogen bomb on a bunker at the edge of the Iron Curtain, waiting for that horn to go off. And I did it in correspondence courses. So I got to miss all those things, but eventually I was able to get a degree.
I read a little bit in your bio. If you didn't know, he's also an author. He has his own book here, and he has them for sale up here that you'll have a chance to grab at the end. But I read that you found out later in life that you went for most of your life with undiagnosed dyslexia. You mentioned that Bert was always better in school and that you seemed to struggle. Was that something that really felt like a struggle for you growing up, and something that at a certain time maybe felt questionable that would hold you back? Or was that just, oh, it is what it is, and I'm just pushing forward, it's not really on my mind or bothering me or gonna stop me?
Well, the dyslexia thing, actually my wife is a kindergarten school teacher, and some other friends anyway, I was trying to tell them how I read and how I decipher things like that, and they turned around and said, "You're dyslexic." And that was the first time that I knew that I had this disease, and I didn't have any idea about that. I just knew that it was very difficult in an educational environment. It's probably a good C student, although I could fly planes really good.
Did you ever have any voices while you were growing up telling you that if you weren't able to rise above that sea level or anything in that realm, that you wouldn't achieve your dreams of becoming the warrior that you wanted to? Did those ever feel like those were hand in hand and tied together, that one had to happen for the other?
Well, I always knew that there was a drawback to me. At the old, we had a fantastic mother, and she gave us a little limericks to live by. One is, if you can dream it, you can do it, and the only way to fail is if you quit. And adventure, of course, is the essence of life. And those types of things. Actually, she took me when I was in grade school or something. She took me to it was March Air Force. That was Air Force Base right outside of Fresno. B-52s. Yeah. Anyway, went there, and of course they had all the airplanes around and the jets and stuff. And one of the jets that I thought was very fascinating, it was an RF-84F, which is a reconnaissance version of the old Thunder Chief or whatever. And I sat there, and here's this cool guy, he's standing there in his flight suit, and he's got the G-suit on, and he's looking really cool. And I looked in the window of this reconnaissance airplane, where the windows are, where the cameras come out in the nose, and they had scantily clad females in there. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And I was standing there looking up at that, and my mom came by and she says, "Dick, would you like to do that?" No, not that. No, I'm sorry, the pilot. Would you like to fly that airplane? And here I wasn't all that good in school, and I probably had a little problem with self-esteem. And I looked up at that pilot and I thought, wow, he's comes from a different universe, a different person. He has achieved something that there was no fine way that I could ever achieve that. And my mother asked me, she says, "Dick, would you like to do that?" And I looked up at that and I said, "Oh man, would I like to?" But then I said something to the fact that I did not think I could ever attain that. And my mom grabbed me by the nape of the neck and pulled me up and read the riot act to me. It says, "If you want to do that, you can." But the thing that she did after that is you can achieve anything you can dream about. Is all you have to do is manage the motivation. If you keep people motivated for yourself, the people around you, or for your company, to keep them motivated to a certain goal. And that really helped a lot in our 5.5 effort to fly around the world in the Voyager.
Tell them how you managed to get through pilot training at the top of your class, being dyslexic.
Well, I asked,
Yeah.
how was I able to overcome a lot of those things? One thing is you do the motivation. You figure out a way to work around that. I sat in the front row with a tape recorder that I don't think we're allowed to have that, but I sequestered it. And so I turned it on and I could listen to all the lectures and go back and take really good notes and stuff. And that really helped out a lot too. But the thing was, this is what I really wanted to do. It was important. And damn it, although it's going to be very difficult, it's the motivation again. And I wanted to do that.
So, to pair with that sense of motivation, you mentioned that originally, when you went to the place that he said, Fresno area, and you saw that first time, you mentioned that you dealt with some self-esteem issues, but your mom really, got that out of you, made sure that you were on the right track. But in the same way that motivation is something that you need to sort of work at every day, it takes motivation in the same sense takes discipline, and so does self-esteem. And I think a lot of people, they have these dreams, they have ideas, but they struggle with the sense of, will I ever get there? And so after your mom told you that and said, you can do this, and you knew that it was what you were going to do, what did your day-to-day look like to keep yourself aligned on that motivational path and that self-esteem path that you would rise to the occasion?
Well, that's right. And my mother had a lot to do with that. And it's not only says, well, you got to work hard and study hard and then you can be a fighter pilot. It wasn't that. Is that she understood something, and it's managed the motivation again. And after that day at the air show, I'd come back and I wasn't minding myself very good, and she would remind me of standing there that day with that fighter pilot. And she managed every single day on the long journey to achieve that goal.
So you got into college, or I'm sorry, not college. You were in the Air Force and you were doing correspondence learning for your courses to get your Bachelor's of Science. And you were you got to the top of your class, like your wife mentioned, starting the feelings around going to war. And you said you were sitting in Arizona and you knew that you wouldn't want to be anywhere else. But I don't think a lot of us here can imagine that feeling of fear and that feeling of talking yourself into bravery. And so tell us about that time a bit of when you were going to war.
Well, see, here again, it's the same thing. Even standing in that officers club with those people raising hell, with the set of orders in my pocket to go to and fly that supersonic airplane with a big, powerful afterburner and going into combat. But they still haven't answered that question. Could I be a warrior? What differentiates those people? And then I started flying missions in country, and I always thought the in-country flying in South Vietnam was just kind of boring because the forward air controller would put a smoke rocket in the jungle, and then we'd all gather around our flight of four and we'd drop bombs on it and fly home. And I thought, this is really kind of boring. But then there was one day that we had a defended target. And it was kind of a low-level run-in, so I was coming in very low to a bunker complex. And I looked over to my right, over there, and there was a 50 caliber machine gun. 50 cal automatic machine gun, had beautiful tracers on it too. Although I was going after a bunker complex, over to my right, somebody come over and the gun popped up and he started shooting. And he had the audacity to shoot at me. And as the tracers came across the canopy, at that very instant will define you as a warrior. And I've asked a lot of my colleagues, so take me back to the time when you figured out in combat that the tracers were coming at you, specifically. What was within the handful of milliseconds, what was going through your mind at that moment? Now, when the tracers are coming across and they're shooting at you and they're going to kill you, what's your reaction? You duck down behind that little aluminum canopy or the aluminum side of the airplane that couldn't protect anything. You call for your mother, do you break away and your heart would race? What do? And I found this is almost universal to a lot of my colleagues that flew. The first thing that comes to your mind, I looked over there and I saw that gunner and I thought, the audacity of that son of a bitch to shoot at me. And then the next thing that happens to you will probably get you killed. So I boarded my bomb run, clicked on the guns, and I was going to go after that guy. And I'm here today because my flight lead says, Rutan, what are you doing? So I'm going after the gun. He says, get the hell out of there. I says, but sir, he shot at me. Get the hell out of there. And he saved my life. And so at that very moment, I realized that I could be a warrior. Another thing too is that as we went through my combat tour in Vietnam, I wanted to be part of the most dangerous out-of-country operation that they had. And they had another little small detachment in the Air Base there at Phuket. It's called the Missies. And we were gonna fly as a forward air controller over North Vietnam. We were gonna fly 6-hour missions. You penetrate North Vietnamese airspace just at dawn, and they'd all shoot at you. Then tracers full of the sky. It was just pretty beautiful. And we stayed there till noon with multiple aerial refuelings, and in the afternoon we'd relieve you. But you were up there in your area of operation, and your job was to find targets, camouflage targets, and direct other fighter bombers to come in and do that. This was a very extremely high-risk operation, and I loved every minute of it. In fact, after flying a full tour as Missy, I couldn't go back to making monkeys deaf and making toothpicks. I begged, and they allowed me to do another tour at Missy. We had a 28% loss rate. Some of the guys were shot down twice and became prisoners of war. And a handful of them, and in fact, my best buddy got killed up there. But it was exciting, and it was extremely high risk. And there's something about that I found at the combat. And Meriwether Lewis, from the Lewis and Clark expedition, he came back and he reported to President Jefferson. You know, the Corps discovery, the Lewis and Clark expedition went down the Missouri. He came back, and after that 4-year odyssey, he came back and he said to the president, he says, "Sir, the greatest exhilaration a man can experience is being shot at and missed." And he was right, because every time they would come, and when the skies were full of tracers coming after us, a very strange thing happened. The metamorphosis. And everybody has an adrenaline gland, right? The tiger's chasing you, you get to run really fast. I think it's a little gland back in here, but I'm not quite sure. I guarantee you that when somebody starts shooting at you, that little gland becomes active. And what it pumps into your psyche is the most incredible endorphin. Another thing, it is extremely addictive. And so the more you get shot at, the more this thing pumps this incredible endorphin into. Another thing about being a warrior, if you go into combat, you must assume the fact that you're not going to make it. And if you go into combat and you're concerned and be very careful that you want to survive this, you're not worth a damn as a warrior, and you might as well stay home. But those 105 missions that I flew under those very extraordinary set of circumstances, to find targets, direct. And one thing I'd like that I had a great pleasure is killing guns that would shoot at me. If they had the audacity to shoot at Dick Rutan, I made a point and come back to kill them. That was exciting. I flew 105 missions before I finally got shot down. And I rode a burning F-100 out to the Gulf of Tonkin on fire. And I looked up there and I thought, Dick, you have flown more combat missions in this high-risk thing than any other pilot. And if this thing will hold together just long enough to get out to the Gulf of Tonkin and eject and become a member of the Gulf of Tonkin Yacht Club. Then I made a vow to myself that since I had done probably much more than could be asked of any warrior in Vietnam, I made a promise right then that if I get out there and I get to eject and get rescued, I ain't frickin' coming up here anymore.
So that happened. You did make it, and that was that full stop, the end of your Air Force career after that?
No, it wasn't full stop. There was another war. Our country was engaged in 2 wars. The Vietnam War that turned out to be nothing. We had an incompetent government that sold us out. And a lot of my Vietnam colleagues would come back complaining about that and how we were treated. And I kept to remember one thing. I says, look guys, we did not go to combat to support a corrupt, incompetent, expletive government. We did it for the flag. As I left the jungles of Vietnam and went directly to Europe. And our primary mission in Europe was flying the same airplane is to provide a nuclear deterrent in the Cold War. And I spent 4 years sitting in a bunker with a 1 megaton hydrogen bomb in the center line of my F-100, waiting for that horn to go off, and hoping to God it never would. And it did. And we beat those people. And that was the war that we won that was really important, because that would have put our flag in jeopardy.
So, that's amazing. I can't even like wrap my head around that experience, and also the idea of getting addicted to almost dying. That's really interesting. And I like the idea of a warrior laying it all on the field, knowing every time that you're going there, you should expect that it's your last time and you're giving it your all. And I wanted to, you also are an entrepreneur and a pilot for the Voyager flight and an inventor. And I wanted to go into that time of your life, because I think the idea of a warrior, I'm sure you're like, no, if you don't have the Air Force experience, I don't know if you would let people call themselves warriors, but the idea of also as an entrepreneur being a warrior, that you really need to give it your all and put your heart into possibly it taking everything from you. And so you had that experience as well, flying this Voyager flight. And you talk about that you were gonna do it, you had no money, and it was gonna happen. So tell us about that time of your life.
Okay,
Let's get into that.
What you said is very true. And if you remember, one comment I made is that growing up, looking around as a little kid, deciding what you want to be in your life. And I thought I wanted to do something significant, remember? And I want to do it as a pilot. And that was in the back of my mind, and maybe that's what motivated me to become part of this little high-risk operation in Vietnam, is it to do something significant. And I did. And I flew more missions and more time over North Vietnam than anybody else. And I thought that was it. And by the way, I lost more colleagues killed in the Cold War than I did in the Vietnam War. And a lot of people don't know what happened, because a lot of it was Francis Gary Powers and many other people, many other operations against the Soviets in the Cold War that a lot of you don't know. One of my big regrets is in the mall in Washington, D.C., they have monuments for World War I and II and Korea and Vietnam and so forth. But there's no monument to one of the really major conflicts that our country needed to win to still have a country, and that was the Cold War. And maybe someday, some of those people that sacrificed and died during that conflict will have the proper recognition. Now then after that, I had to come back to the States, and I had an incredible combat record, highly decorated. I'd actually got a college degree, and I was on my way to be Chief of Staff of the Air Force until there were some bad times in the Air Force in the late 70s with drugs and a lot of problems. And I was a squadron commander of 420 maintenance people, and half of them were all up on drugs. And I was throwing them out of the Air Force and had to deal with a couple of squadron commander, 4 general court-martials, all drug-related. And they had sabotaged my car and me and run after me. A lot of times happened. But I was throwing kids out for drugs, and I wanted people to not smoke in my barrack, in my operation anymore. Of course, at that time, the whole Air Force was built around cigarettes and alcohol as their social environment. Another thing too, I was mad that they'd locked up the females. About a third of my squadron of maintenance people were female, and they'd lock them up at night in the barracks. And of course, all the other guys that were out roaming around, they would sneak in and commiserate with my females. And I said, I want all of my troops in my barracks. And they all freaked out, and I says, Colonel Rutan, what do you think is going to happen if you did that? I says, I know exactly what's going to happen. It'll take about 10 days, it'll sort itself out, and then all my troops can have the same freedom that they have, male or female. But the thing I think that put me over the edge one day is that I was at an officer's reception, and the wing commander and so forth, and I looked out in the backyard, and the officers' wives were back there toking marijuana, doing the same thing that I was throwing these kids out of the Air Force for. And I thought, you know something? I got a lot of things I like to do in my life, and none of them has anything to do with the United States Air Force. So with 20 years for retirement and 1 microsecond to make sure that I got it, I left the Air Force and joined my brother in a crummy little desert town in the high desert of California, a place called Mojave. And it was really exciting. And he was doing all kinds of stuff and building different airplanes, and he would let me fly them and test them, and that was just really great. And then he came up and says, hey, Dick, why don't you fly around? He says, I'll design an airplane, and you guys build it and fly it around the world nonstop, non-refueled. And I thought, aha, maybe there is another opportunity to be recognized as a pilot. So then we're off on that 5.5-year odyssey to fly nonstop around the world.
So with that, I'm sure lots of iterations, lots of failed attempts at prototypes and things like that. You said it took 5 years to get to the time when it actually happened. And I know the year that it happened was 1986, right?
That's right. Well, it started in 1980. I believe it was 1980, wasn't it? Bert and Mike Melville and Sally and my girlfriend Gina at the time, we all got together and had a little meeting, and we decided that we would take on this challenge. And the challenge, I mean, typical of my brother, you know, he's so far out there that doing stuff that nobody ever thought he could do. Like he wanted to make astronauts, and I says, Bert, we build home-built airplanes that go 200 miles an hour, maybe. You want to build an airplane that's going to go 3.5 times the speed of sound and high enough to qualify as an astronaut? Anyway, that's the mindset that this guy has. But back in 1980, he says, hey, nobody's ever flown around the world non-stop, non-refueled. And almost an incredible challenge to go and do that. And he says, with the advent and availability of carbon fiber, he thought it was just possible to build an airplane light enough to hold the amount of fuel to fly, as it turned out, 9 days, 3 minutes, and 44 seconds, 26,358 statute miles, non-stop, to be the first around the world non-stop, non-refueled. Woo!
Wow. I want to touch on how that the combination of you and Bert. So if you have been around the IC and you were with us for Bert's Fireside Chat last year, we've taken this phrase that we carry with us at the Innovation Collective, that true innovation comes from confidence in nonsense. And this idea that when he had this dream, you were the person who was like, are you crazy? Like, what are you doing out here? You think we're gonna make astronauts and all this stuff? But then also you had the mindset of, you know, adventure is the essence of life, and you only fail if you quit. So that piece together just was the ultimate recipe. But through that, you probably faced some significant failures, or at least setbacks. So what did that journey of those setbacks and the time frame to get there, how did that kind of manifest in your motivation every day and your determination to make it happen?
Well, when we met that day and took on the task to try to attempt to be the first around the world unrefueled, of course, we were really excited about it. And I knew that, hey, this is an opportunity to do something significant in my life, and having done it as a pilot. I said, wow, manifest destiny, maybe. And boy, we were so excited about this, and Bert, he drew a three view of this airplane that he had designed that's really weird looking, and I have a picture of it here. We'll show that later.
Oh, okay.
We'll show that later, but we went out and, of course, right out of the Air Force, I didn't have any money. My girlfriend didn't have any money either, much, but over 18 months, we had spent all of our savings trying to find somebody to fund this thing. You know, I thought that this is, wow, it's around the world, the airplane, everybody will see it, it'll be on TV all over. What an incredible opportunity for an advertiser that builds, you know, what do they sell? Tennis shoes, tampons, tennis shoes, Coca-Cola, beer, whatever it was going to be. But we went and we never could find anybody that would do that, except one outfit did. And he came up to Europe and he recognized the significance, the advertising opportunity for an airplane that would be known for a couple of weeks maybe, that it would be a vehicle to advertise his product. And he walked up to me, to Gene and I, and he says, and he offered us, remember this is the 1980s, $2.2 million. Wow, now we were so poor, we're living in a junk place. I didn't have enough money to replace my worn out tennis shoes or ragged Levi's. My mother would come by and make tacos or something for us, and that's how we were surviving with no money. $2.2 million. And Gene and I both looked at each other, we looked at him, and we told him, sir, your whole industry does not have enough money for us to put a cigarette on the side of our airplane. And we turned around and we walked away and we thought, did we just turn down that kind of money? And then we both realized that there was no way that we would be any part of promoting the most deadly narcotic ever known to mankind. And so we went back to Povertyville and we realized the people that were going to fund it were volunteers. There were 99 of them that came over those 5.5 years. And I got real good about being on my knees begging for equipment, from carbon fiber to engines to avionics to fuel to everything that would do that. And just taking really small donations.
So that was a move for your integrity. That was something that you weren't going to budge on. Looking back, are you happy with that decision?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I never look back on it.
Yeah.
It's the second biggest decision I ever made in my life.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. That's a big decision.
You know what my first decision was? It's marrying my wife.
Can you tell us, where does Chris, where does she come into the picture in the
Chris,
timeline here?
I did not meet Chris until after the flight of the Voyager. And I was we were in a hamburger joint, and she picked me up in a hamburger joint. No, she was afterwards. And when we talk a little bit about the Voyager, you'll maybe understand.
Yeah. So again, on the Voyager, once you took off, we all, or maybe you don't know the story, but the wing of your plane broke, right? When you first took off.
Yes, the wings. It's a long story over the 5.5 years, and there was a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
Obviously, not having any money, and we needed a lot of expertise and a lot of volunteers to build an airplane out of carbon fiber that was bigger than a 737 airliner, wingspan-wise, and it was a lot of work. And like, you ever try to herd cats? Now I couldn't pay anybody anything almost. We only had a couple of people that we could pay. But they would come in and the volunteers wouldn't finish it all. And I'd get upset, but I'd think, well, at least they came in and got half of it done. But over that period of time, and there was a lot of challenges that, and we went to a lot of people to try to find funding. The only person that was interested was Ross Perot Jr. And we met with Ross Perot in his Dallas headquarters, from the crummy little desert town of Povertyville to the grandeur of his office and his wood paneling and stuff. And he said he almost was going to fund it, but he said, that he was part of the Dallas School Board, and they were in the middle of it's the Bible Belt. The Bible Belt, and he looked at us and says, well, since you and Gina are not married, I couldn't be involved with that. In California, I didn't think that made all that much difference. But then we finally, after all of our money, and we've been through a lot of people that really messed with us a lot and used us, I realized it wasn't going to be funded by a major corporation. It was going to be funded by general aviation, the people that we knew that just loved airplanes, but that did donations. And so we had to call the Voyagers Impressive People Company, and they were the Voyager volunteers. And I was pretty good at getting the $250,000 worth of carbon fiber or the special engines or the long-range communications, avionics and stuff, and we finally got this thing done. But when we finally decided that we weren't going to have anybody write a big check for us, we looked at each other and it says, you know who's going to build it? If you have a big lawn and you can't afford, or if you don't want to mow it, then if you're not going to mow it yourself, you're going to have to hire somebody to do it. And if you can't hire anybody, then you got to do it yourself. And so what we did is that Gene and I and Bruce Evans and a couple other people, and in Bert's shop that was, the hangar wasn't even about maybe 2/3 as big as this room, that we built an airplane out of carbon fiber. Like I said, it was bigger than an airliner in this little room. And so we were going to get this thing done. It took us 20 months. Gene and I, we worked around the clock. We didn't stop to eat. We never went to a movie. We never went out to eat. We never did anything. We worked for 20 months till we were bone tired, got some sleep, and went back and handled it again. And at the end of that 20 months, we had an airplane sitting on the ramp that was, with some more modification, that was theoretically capable of a first trans-global flight unrefueled. Now, to put it in perspective, the absolute distance record of any airplane ever to fly, the absolute distance record was held by a B-52 intercontinental, a straddle bomber. And that thing could only go halfway around the world. So who were we? It's just like Bert, that builds the home builds, is going to make astronauts. It's the same thing. He says, here, this handful of people with this dream and hard work, we were going to take on an absolute record. It's not only to break it, which in itself would be quite an accomplishment, we had to double it.
So takeoff happens with the flight.
Okay, well, anyway, we built the airplane and went through 2.5 years of flight testing. And a lot of things happened in the flight testing. This airplane was very frail because remember that it has to be some extreme compromises to its structural integrity, its handling qualities, and many other things to be able to carry enough fuel to go around the world. Now, here again the challenge, and Bert, don't try to correct me because I'm just a fighter pilot and I round things off. But here's an airplane that's going to have a max gross weight of like 10,000 pounds. And it's got to carry 3.6 tons of fuel in a primary structure. I'm going to never forget the day that we weighed the airplane and its structure. And we weighed it, and I'm trying to think of this, that the structural weight of this carbon fiber airplane was 926 pounds. I'll never forget that number. And that 926 pounds had to carry, I knew he was going to do that.
You gave me the thumbs up. He said you did it.
He's too technical, but I round that up. Anyway, 926 pounds was going to carry 3.6 tons of fuel, 2 engines, 2 hardy souls, a little food and water, some avionics. So the fuel, well, the major part of the airplane was fuel, which is pretty unusual. And it was only made possible through carbon fiber. However, some great compromises, because remember, every ounce that's not fuel, every ounce you can take off the airplane, like the weight, lost a lot of weight. We sanded paint off the airplane. Bert was fanatical and beating us up all the time about extra things. But the problem is that the combination of all of those things, and I want to take, can we start? Okay, the Voyager flight.
Yeah.
And after all this flight testing and so forth, you know, the propeller blade came off and had cockpit fires and all kinds of things happened during this thing. But finally, at one day, in a cold December morning in 1986, 1986, I found myself at the end of the world's longest runway at Edwards Air Force Base, high desert of California. And this 3-mile long runway, the end of it was not a power line or a ditch. It was a 7-mile dry lake called Voyager's Dry Lake. So if this thing didn't get airborne, at least we could run off into a dry lake and have some opportunity to survive. Now, if we can, do you want to
play your
okay,
video?
if we go into we can turn the lights down. I want to give you a perspective.
Yeah.
A couple of those photographs.
Totally.
First of all, I want to look and see what this strange airplane even looked like.
Dick, you might want to tell them about, it's basically a flying fuel tank, and she was asking what happened with the winglets.
Yeah, tell us about the wing.
Okay, it was a flying fuel tank. And that morning, the wings, the first time we ever had that much fuel on board. And the wings bent down and was going to drag on the runway.
Sorry.
There's a couple of pictures of the cockpit mock-up.
That's me and my dog. My boyfriend.
Whoops. Yeah, that's what the airplane looks like. See the 2 boom tanks, the pusher, puller engines. Okay, if you can keep that in mind, they have 2 engines front and back, and those boom tanks out there are full of fuel, and it had fuel from tip to tip and nose to tail. Even the canard up front had fuel in it.
Wow.
Okay, the next picture of the cockpit, what it looks like.
I don't know if it's not a picture of the cockpit.
Yeah, the mock-up.
That's me, my boyfriend, and my dog. Shout out. This is a photo.
No. Well, that's.
Yeah, who's this? Tell us about this photo.
Oh, this is a photograph of guys, Chuck Shaheen. And about 3.5 hours after this photograph was taken, both of us were swimming in the Gulf of Tonkin.
Oh, wow.
Turned out to be my last one. But there's two superhero combat fighter pilots going off to do mortal combat with his fellow men.
You told me to bring this photo up.
Oh, that one. Now, I won't get ahead of myself, but that's the bathroom.
Yeah, tell us about this.
Anyway, the tube was yellow before we took off. And this is the device. But once we get up, and if you can find the picture of how small the cockpit is, and I'm a big advocate of flight testing. You want to flight test everything. It isn't finished until it's flight tested. I did not flight test this because it seemed to be pretty simple. And it's a medical device, and this plastic gets pulled off just like a Band-Aid, right? And then you glue it around you know what, around you know where. And the first time that I was
This is the only other thing that you told me.
the cockpit. We got a picture of the cockpit mock-up.
All right.
Anyway, I was laying in this little small little area, trying to affix this thing to my posterior, and realized that the target was the bottom of a big crease. And this is extremely sticky. It's in a medical stickiness. And once I maneuvered it in position, and you deposited the material within, the removal was quite interesting because it brought me back to a fond memory of childhood. When all of us have experienced the same thing, when you scrape your elbow and mom puts a Band-Aid on your arm, and when it heals, the technique of how to remove it, right? Some people remove it faster or slower. I'll tell you what, it's a lot more tender here than it ever was on this little kid's arm.
We're just finding the
So it's one of those that I pull off.
No, that's the picture of the plane.
That's okay. Anyway, it's really small.
There's this, at least. This was the mock-up.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, hold on. I'll get it on there.
That's the mock-up about how small it is. And so two of us spent, well, actually, I spent 720 hours in that cockpit during flight testing and the world flight.
Is that Gina?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah.
We can see it easier if you turn the lights down even more.
Right, we're going to do that. If you can cue up the world
video?
flight takeoff,
Sure.
cue that up. We get the lights down.
Okay. Is that better with the lights, everyone? Okay. Here we go.
Okay, that one, if we can expand it. Okay, now hold it right there. We'll talk a little bit. We had flown the airplane this heavy before. This is the first time we did the flight test. And my philosophy was, hey, if it doesn't work, it doesn't make any difference to the crew whether it's on a flight test or on a world flight attempt. I figure if we only have to do this one time, let's just do the best we can. Bert had engineered how much fuel that the airplane can take and still get airborne. And since we couldn't flight test it near that number, he had to make a very educated guess that had a lot to do with whether we were going to survive or not. Anyway, there's a little controversy about the ultimate fuel load. But anyway, to test that, now here's an airplane that had no main wheel brakes. You know how heavy a wheel brake is and how much miles you can go replace the weight of a wheel brake with fuel? A long ways. To give you an idea, Gina's hair, she had nice long hair, we cut it off and weighed it, and the weight of her hair would represent almost a quarter of a mile of range. So weight was really critical.
Wow.
So we were going to decide what the ultimate fuel load was going to be that morning to get airborne. There was some argument about that. And we came up with a plan that said that at midfield, a mile and a half down the runway, if we had not achieved 68 knots, then I was going to abort. And it was going to take another mile and a half to stop this airplane with a little tiny nose wheel brake and a max power reverse on the back engine before we ran out of runway. Now, I want to put this in my mental situation. 5.5 years, I'd been at this thing chasing volunteers, trying to organize, borrow parts, putting it all together, and arguing with my brother about weight things. But the long and the short of it was, I was tired. I was really tired. That strain, and my attitude that morning was, I just want to get this damn thing over with, one way or another. And so we started the engines that morning. It was a cold, frosty morning, ideal conditions at Edwards Air Force Base. We're sitting at the end of the runway. And Bert said if we didn't have 68 knots at midfield, that I would abort. Now in my mind, and I said that I would abort just to placate him and get him off my neck. But I'll tell you one thing, I was not going to frickin' quit that morning. I didn't care if it was on fire. I just wanted this thing over with once and for all. So as we sat at the end of the runway, I looked down that 3-mile long runway, and I pushed both throttles wide open and released that tiny little nose wheel brake and thought about if I would survive the next 5 minutes. That's the name of the book, by the way. Okay, ready? Okay, wait a minute, one thing. Any questions about this? Comments? You want to go along?
All the plumbing there was to get the frost off the wing.
Gotcha.
See those big hoses?
Yeah.
That's right, there was hoses.
To get the frost off the wing.
Now, at that morning, it was cold. And to have frost, you have zero wind. And so there wasn't any wind. And all of a sudden, it was going to take all night to fuel the airplane. Because it had 19 fuel tanks. And they were filled almost a pound of fuel at a time to the 19 tanks. by the way, if we filled up one tank all the way, it would break the airplane off. Like something on the right wing, we'd have to balance it on the left wing, and the boom tanks, you could fill up one boom tank and it'd break it off, unless it was balanced by something else. But anyway, those are the heaters.
Another thing you should mention before you run this. See how close the wing is to the ground? It's 9 inches off the ground. We fueled it with the wings up on sawhorses. And then when it was full, we took the sawhorses out and a bunch of people let the wing down. And I'm sitting there hoping that it doesn't touch the ground.
That's right, because we didn't have that much fuel on
That's
board.
where it went. It was low enough that fuel was dribbling out of the vest, out of the top of the guys holding it.
That's right. Both wing tips were bent down, and you'll see that on the takeoff roll. And the nose was bent down too. The boom tanks were bent down. And so the thing looked ungodly, like it could never fly. And about halfway down the runway, the wings did not fly up, because the extra booms up front had bent the wings so that they didn't lift, but they would lift down. And they started dragging. And for many years we thought it was a screw up. But it finally dawned on us many years later that if it had not have dropped on the ground, we would not have made it. Because it was designed to go down the runway and start flying and lifting all the tons of fuel up. And it takes a lot of drag to lift the wings up, right? And with that extra drag, we probably would not have made that takeoff this morning.
Ready?
Okay, you ready? Hang on. Well, the heaters have been taken away. Bruce Levin, my loyal crew chief, he helped build it. If you notice too that the boom tanks are bent down. We didn't inch down, and I'd never seen that before, and it never dawned on me it was going to twist the wing the wrong way. There's that tiny little nose wheel up front. It had a brake on it just like you would use a foot on a skateboard. That's about all we had for a brake. Now, as the old Voyager, with its 3.6 tons of fuel, lumbered off that morning, there's Fergie Fay. He was a P-51 World War II fighter pilot, a volunteer that showed up. And a couple of other our volunteers sat there that morning as the airplane lumbered off down that 3-mile-long runway. And I often thought what they were thinking at that time. And Bruce Evans, Gene and I and Bruce basically built the whole airplane. And he sat there and watched the airplane. This will take 2 minutes and 10 seconds for the takeoff roll. It will consume about 95% of the world's longest runway.
What's the wingspan?
As the airplane accelerates, the wings didn't come up, the wings started going down. If you can see, the nose of the boom tanks are pointed down too. I've never seen that before. We came upon the midfield. And we're 4 knots low at midfield. So I called it on the radio, we're 4 knots low at midfield. And I had promised that I would quit. But maybe everybody else knew too that I wasn't going to quit. Anyway, look at this poor thing. The wingtips are dragging, the nose is bent down, and pretty soon for you pilots, you'll see the glide slope for the opposite end of the runway antenna go by. Come on, baby.
Someone asked, what is the wingspan?
Wingspan is 111 feet.
Wow.
Okay, there's the antenna, and the end of the runway is coming up, and it's roughly about 100 knots that we needed to get airborne. And that morning, I reached down to the control stick and grabbed a hold of it, and I eased it back, and I thought, if I've never been smooth at any time in your life, you better be smooth right now, Dick, because this is the big one. Come on. Come on. I thought the wingtips would touch over my head almost, and then airborne. It got airborne. I couldn't believe it. As a Gene, look, it got airborne. It got airborne. And as we accelerated to 100 knots, Bert was saying, What the real excitement was, he got 100 knots, he got 100 knots. And he knew right then that we had enough excess power to climb. And as the airplane climbed away that morning, out over that famous dry lake at Edwards Air Force Base, we called Aviation's Howl of the Ground, where Chuck Yeager and Scott Crossfield chased the demons in the sky. I'll let this run a little bit, and you can see that the wingtips are damaged, and you can see one of the wingtips shred off.
Because of the boom and the way Dick was unaware that the wingtips were scraping.
Right, I couldn't see them because they were in the boom tanks. The wingtips were scraping and grinding away, and they were screaming at me to pull back on the stick, pull back on the stick. It was my job to raise the nose gear, and there was a little thin cable underneath the instrument panel that I had to pull. And then Gina's job was to go ahead and retract each of the main gear, and that would take her about, oh, I don't know, 6 or 8 minutes per landing gear to get it up. And then the wingtips that we're really concerned about, those little winglets were just hanging there. There was a lot of controversy about how we were going to get rid of them or how we were going to use them and so forth. And so the next clip here, we'll see the wingtip come off. And I'll point it out to you. I think it's up on the left side of the screen. Here's the landing gear slowly being winched in. And I have to stay there for a week and a half. A week and a half in that phone booth? You kidding me? Okay,
Nope.
it's finally up. Now, okay, look at the upper left. Now watch it, watch it, watch it, watch it. And it came off. The right wingtip came off in a similar manner about 20 minutes later. And that's what we ended up with as a wingtip. It's not how we designed it at all.
What were you thinking when that happened? Were you like, oh shit?
Okay, that's a good question. What were you thinking? And it comes back to another thing my mother always said, and it says, don't worry about something you can do nothing about. Now, as we took off and those winglets were just barely hanging on, there was a lot of talk in my headset about what would happen. That the vents would be sealed off, that we would peel that carbon fiber back into that fuel tank, and if it did that, it would dump the fuel out there and we could not control it, and that would be the end. And I looked out there and thought, there's not a damn thing I can do about that right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. Don't worry about something you can do nothing about. We leveled off about 6,500 feet. That's all.
That's amazing. Wow.
We circled Edwards 1 or 2 times, got rid of the winglets, and leveled off at 6,500 feet, and pointed, and we put W in the compass. And 9 days, 3 minutes and 44 seconds later, without turning around and still having W in the compass, we're back at Edwards. And I'll just point out a couple of things. Two things.
Lights are coming on. Shock warning.
Okay, 2 things. One of them was that my brother, anyway, they followed us, I don't know, a couple 100 miles out over the Pacific Ocean. And Bert realized he couldn't see land anymore. And so he turned around to go back. But it was a very emotional party because there was Bert, Mike and Sally, and of course Gina and I and the Voyager. And we turned and waved at each other for the very last time, and they turned back to California. And Bert told me later that he probably would never see his brother again. Now, a lot of things happened on that world flight. Typhoon March, almost getting shot down again in Vietnam, high altitude over Africa. Gina almost run me into Mount Cameron in Africa because besides running out of oil. Yeah, I sat in a seat. Gina could not fly the airplane. She didn't know how to fly it. The airplane was very unstable until it burned off about half of its fuel. And if you just let go of the stick, the airplane would start porpoising divergently. And after about the 3 iteration, the wings would probably fail. And so to let go of the airplane, Gina could not do that. And so until we burned off enough fuel, I sat in the cockpit for 3 nights.
Wow.
And it was going into the 4th night over the Philippines, and I says, Dick, you can't do this anymore. You're gonna have to get some sleep. And so for the first time, I crawled back and got an hour of sleep until the main attitude indicator failed. I had to deal with that. Anyway, she didn't know how to run the radar, and so she almost ran us into Mount Cameron, missed it by less than a mile in the dark night. A lot of different things happened, but for some reason, every time the sun would come up, I'd look around and I says, hey, we're still airborne, and I still have W in the compass. And then finally we were back in our hemisphere, and then it was midnight, and we were supposed to get home at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we had a real serious malfunction of a fuel transfer pump. And long and the short of it, for a while there, we had both engines out, and we were in a spiral going into the dark ocean right off Cabo San Lucas. And I kept thinking, look at all we've been through. It's 5.5 years, and we're almost home. We're so close. I can understand failing in Africa or some other place a long ways from home, but not this close to home. Fate can't be that cruel. And we finally worked it out and got both engines running again. And then we climbed back again and found, hiding in the airplane someplace, we finally found enough fuel to get us home from Cabo. And then there was the rejoin at that time. It was a very emotional thing. At least it was for me, and I'm sure it was for Bert, because all of us were crying that night. And we're coming up, we're just dark night, you couldn't see anything outside, and we're just gonna come up off in the Pacific Ocean, about ready to make landfall again in the LA Basin or Long Beach. And I sat there that night, and they were gonna rejoin, and Mike was in the airplane, we're gonna do a head-on research.
Real close to San Diego.
Yeah, okay, off San Diego. Anyway, it was dark and we're out over the ocean. As all I could see was a strobe light coming head on at us. And Mike Melly joined up, and all he could see was a flashing strobe light that night, flashing. And then, and Bert said he didn't really know that it was him. It would be neat if it was, but he had to have confirmation.
And why his navigation lights, the red and green, were ground off on takeoff.
That's right, all he could see.
He only had a stroke.
But all he needed was a confirmation. And so his idea was, Dick, why don't you turn off the strobe just to make sure it's you? And I thought that was a pretty good idea. So the strobe was flashing that night, and I reached up and turned the little switch, and it stopped flashing. And just for a handful of time, he said, okay, turn it back on again. And I turned it back on, and it started flashing again. And all of a sudden, it hit us that it really was the Voyager, and they really were coming back. And the reunion that night for us was so emotional, we started crying, and we couldn't even talk on the radio until the sun came up that morning, and then there was the LA Basin, and then there was the high desert of California, and then there was tens of thousands of people that came out to meet the Voyager, and we descended and flew. We just didn't come in and land. Flew around for about a half an hour to show off or something, and said words like, hey Dick, what time is it? He says, well, it's Miller time, you only go around once. But the biggest one was, he said, hey Dick, what are you gonna do now? And I thought, well, going to Disneyland. And as it turned out, Eisner and his wife, years later, they figured out that I was the one that said that for the first time. And they would, you may remember when somebody wins the Super Bowl and the cameras zoom in on him and hey Joe, what are you gonna do now? And he says, I'm going to Disneyland. Well, he got $50,000 for saying that. And we didn't get anything. Anyway, we landed the airplane, and the airplane hangs in the National Air and Space Museum as a tribute that if you can dream it, you can do it, and the only way to fail is if you quit. And we were the first ones to do that.
Wow. That's amazing. So,
Actually, the relationship between Gene and myself ended about a couple of months before the flight, actually. We weren't even talking to each other. It was very difficult to get her to train up on some of the systems and stuff, and I made the statement to her. I said, Gina, if you don't learn how to operate this stuff, I can't do this thing alone. If you don't do it or learn it, then I'm going to replace you with an actual pilot. And she looked at me and says, either take me or I'll burn the airplane. And I only had two choices, and one of them would put me in jail. But when we took off that morning, I had no idea how we were going to do this. If you have two pilots on board, that you can actually lay down and get the rest, knowing that the other pilot can handle any emergency that comes up. But if you're laying back there knowing if the autopilot kicks off, the airplane will self-destruct long before I can even get to the controls. So there was a little bit of anxiety in that. When she almost ran us into a mountain in Africa, well, I told her, I knew that there was Mount Cameron. We were 7,000 feet. Mount Cameron is a cinder cone like Mount Shasta or something, and it's 14,500 feet. And there's a couple of those mountains just before you go feet wet in Central Africa. And boy, it was as dark as the inside of a cow. You couldn't see anything outside. And so the only navigation I had was this VLF and Omega, which is kind of crude. And I wasn't going to depend on that to miss those mountains. But we had radar on board, and I could pick out those mountains on the radar. Well, Gina didn't have any idea about what the radar looked like. And I told her, there's a little place called Yankee Delta. And Yankee Delta is an hour and a half from those mountains. And I made her promise me, I says, you wake me up before that. And we also, the mission control, called us over halfway around the world and says, hey, look out for those mountains out there. So she knew they were there, I guess. Evidently she didn't. Because, and I was going to crawl in the back, which I never did at night, but I really had to get some sleep after Africa crossing. I crawled in the back, and I says, God, she wakes me up at Yankee Delta. And I was pretty worried about those mountains out there. And then I can't remember going to sleep a minute. And then as we're laying down, my feet were up where she was, and she would shake my feet and wake up. My first words out of my mouth was, are we at Yankee Delta yet? And she said, oh, that. We passed it an hour and a half ago. And she was blocking the side of the radar, so I had her to move over. And without a word of a lie, there was a black V in the middle of the radar. The black means that where there's no radar return after that. And at the bottom of the V was at zero range. And I don't know how close we came to the mountain, but it was less than a quarter of a mile. And it's all I could do laying in the back was just saying, turn, 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 turn. And no autopilot was just turning so slow, but we missed it. Now, my comment to her after that was probably the reason that she left and I've never seen her again. And I don't blame her. But the long and the short of it is that those two people got in that airplane on that day, and they successfully was the first unrefueled transglobal flight ever.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is just bar talk or whatever.
That's awesome. I wanted to say thank you for sharing that story with us. Super amazing to be able to see that video and get a little bit of your perspective from something that none of us will ever be able to experience.
Okay.
That's amazing.
There's always a couple of questions, and I'll go and answer them real quick. Then just take a couple of seconds. One is, how much fuel did you have when you get back? Okay, now put it in perspective. We had 1/2 of our takeoff fuel. That's like going from here to Portland, Oregon, and having enough fuel in your car to go maybe halfway around the block. Wow. So we just barely got back. What was the other question?
That was it.
Oh yeah, how much fuel do we have?
Yeah,
That's terrifying.
Yeah, that's
18
here.
gallons.
Actually, to put it in perspective, that 0.5% would have taken the airplane from Edwards Air Force Base that morning past Portland, Oregon. So if you look at it that way, we got back with plenty of fuel. But in reality, is by the skin of our teeth, we just barely got back.
Awesome. So we're gonna jump into some Q&A. We have time for maybe like 5 questions or so, and then Dick is selling his books. They're $25 cash sales if you would like to grab one. And he will probably be willing to answer more questions, but...
Hold on. Is Dick going to autograph his books?
Yes, we'll autograph. I'll stay here as long as anybody wants.
All right, and maybe we could even like, wrestle a brother autograph it. I don't know, I don't promise that one.
Yeah.
I'll do.
We're gonna do about 5 questions publicly, and then I wanted to wrap up with a little bit of housekeeping about other IC things, and then we'll break for you guys to continue mingling and get your autographs. So.
Yeah, other questions? Yeah, okay, let's see back there. Let me run back with the mic.
I was at Edwards when you landed.
No, you gotta say that. I don't think they were able to hear that. Hold on, what was your name now?
Dick Gardner. I was at Edwards when you landed, and I also met you and Gina at Cal State University in San Bernardino.
Wow.
Was that your picture that you gave us? Just over the,
No.
that wasn't you?
Why, when you live in Coeur d'Alene
Okay, there's a question here.
now? Actually, we had one right here I want to go to. What was your name, Kurt?
Colin Slater. What was the max speed of the aircraft?
What was that max speed?
What was the back seat of the airplane?
What
The
was
max
the
speed,
maximum speed?
fastest it
Oh,
could go.
Let's see, what was the maximum speed of the airplane? I have absolutely no idea. And I did not care. We spent all that flight test. I never test stalled the airplane. I never determined how fast it was going, because it had absolutely nothing to do with the world flight. If it didn't have anything that was not to do with the world flight, I didn't do it. Because the only thing we were interested in is that sweet spot of lift-over drag. But for whatever the weight of the airplane is, there's a perfect speed to fly for maximum range. And that's what we tested and refined and spent all of our time adjusting that.
And what was that?
All right, we got
Oh,
one.
well, it started out with maybe 100 miles an hour, and ended up with, I'm so slow I could probably land it on my briefcase.
Started at 118.
How much per?
Best range speed after you took off was 118 miles an hour true.
118 miles an hour cruise, best range
When we
speed.
got back to Edwards, the speed for best range was actually less than 60 knots, but you knew you had enough gas, so you went to 70 something.
Yeah, we did speed up over maximum range, but the difference between its heavyweight speed and its lightweight speed was dramatically different. I thought it was something like 48 to 50, but
We got another one over here.
George. Dick, you might tell them a story about what happened the first time we took the Voyager and encountered rain in a storm.
he asked a question about the rain encounter. There was a genius individual, his name is John Rounce, and he built the airfoil shapes. He determined the shape of the wing up front. And it was the strangest looking airfoil I'd ever seen. And it was supposed to run it very efficiently. And it was 1.3 CL, never mind that. But it was very, very efficient. However, Gene and I were on a flight test one day, and I looked over at the end of the other side of the valley over there, and there was a rain shower, kind of like a virga. Kind of like a virga. And so I says, well, gee, I wonder if this thing will fly in the rain. Because I knew that if you fly around the world at low altitude near the equator, you may run into an occasional rain shower. So anyway, we turned over there, and I punched into this little rain shower, and the nose pitched up a little bit, and then the nose dropped. And the rain had destroyed the airfoil, or the laminar flow or something around it. But the long and the short is that we lost a whole bunch of lift, and the airplane was going down, and there wasn't a thing I could do to pull out. Full left stick, full forward stick, power differential, and in fact, I thought, what a shame. Here we did all this work and build this airplane, and nobody will ever know what happened. There'll just be a wreckage strewn out across the desert. And I ordered Gina to bail out. And so while she was getting her parachute on and I was taking the canopy off, on her way out, she says, well, what are you going to do? And I says, well, I'm going to stay and see if I can save this airplane. And she looked at me and says, if you're staying, I'm staying. And she took her parachute off and threw it in the back. Now, fortunately, this rain shower was kind of long and skinny. As we flew through it, we lost a lot of our lift. And all of a sudden it started to dry out. And as the rain was drying off the canopy, it was getting less and less and less. The airplane slowly on its own dried off just enough, and we pulled out the other side. I'm not saying we pulled out in weights, but it was low enough to the desert floor. So there had to be some modification to the airfoil, some vortex generation stuff to correct that. The interesting thing is that being in the desert, I never had a chance to flight test that thing. And the first time I flight tested it was going through a feeder band on Typhoon March over Guam. And it was raining like mad, and it didn't pitch down, and it worked fine, and they fixed it. So that was a real close one. But actually, Gene and I were not the ones that were in the most danger for their life on that day. Because when I got back, Bert's alive today because he was not at the airport that day. And so I came in and landed, and I called him on the phone, and I told him what happened. And his comment was, well, don't fly in the rain.
About killing John Ross, not me.
Yeah. So anyway, that was just one of the many small crises we had.
Any other questions? We got about 2 more. How about over here? We'll run over to Steve like that bird and we'll grab the mic.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I actually have a 2-part. What's the most fascinating, most terrifying thing in aerospace that you found?
Most fascinating, most terrifying thing about aerospace for you?
Oh, for me?
Yeah, for you.
Well, I hope you read the book. There was, after the flight of the Voyager, I was looking for another project, and I wondered if anybody had flown around the world in a balloon. And I found nobody had. And so anyway, I learned how to fly a balloon, and this time it was fully funded by Baron Hilton and Pepsi-Cola. And Bert built an 8-foot diameter carbon fiber sphere. It was a pressurized closed loop life support system, really cool, with all the radios and stuff in that. And we launched out of Albuquerque, New Mexico at the Balloon Festival. We're alive today because we were delayed about 3 hours on the launch. So what happened in the daylight, not at dark. But the airplane, Baron Hilton cut us loose that morning with sirens and patriotic music, and we're climbing up into the stratosphere in this pressurized balloon capsule, and we're on our way around the world. And we leveled off at our float altitude was about, 30,000 feet, I think. And we're just kind of settling in. Yeah, we're going to be here maybe a whole month. Took our shoes off, and I took off my gold Rolex watch. What a worthless thing that is. I didn't keep good time, didn't know what date it was. So I threw it up in the corner, got my Casio out, $2.98, it does all those things. Took my wallet out, threw all that stuff up, we were just settling in, and there was a big explosion. It goes bang, and it popped us up off the floor, and I looked up through a dome on the top and the bottom of the balloon, and the whole helium envelope had shredded and blown out. And so I knew right then that our world flight in the balloon was over. And there was ripping and tearing, and came down, we were descending, and I guess about 8,000 feet, I made the decision to go ahead and bail out. And so we got up and bailed out of it. Well, we didn't even get out of the county, but we're coming down just east of New Mexico in the high desert of New Mexico, very sparsely populated. And collared Mayday. Now all the helicopters were up on the road watch or the news road traffic guys were all orbiting. And boy, they heard the Mayday, and those vultures, they come tearing out there. And so they were circling the balloon as we were coming down. And I could hear it turning and ripping and tearing, knowing that if it ripped and all that helium came out at once, that $250,000 balloon envelope was going to be nothing but a flag marker for the impact crater. And so we bailed out. Now the winds were really strong that morning, like 45 knots for crying out loud. And the co-pilot, he landed and he hurt himself really bad because he didn't know how to land in high winds. And I did know how to land in high winds. So you go backwards and you hit on your back really hard. And by the time I jettisoned the canopy, it harpooned me right into a cholla cactus patch. So I'm all full of cholla laying down. And I'm really happy because I was alive. So much adrenaline, I never felt one of the spikes or anything. Anyway, I have that in video. It's pretty neat, shows the whole thing. The cactus patch, the helicopter rescue, the cholla cactus, so forth.
So wait, there's like random like people who fell out of the balloon, and balloon parts all over New Mexico. Is this near Roswell?
Well, very good.
You got one, didn't you?
Actually, it was near the town of Vaughn. But every time it would hit, some of the propane tanks, tons of propane around it, and it'd go back up to 30,000 feet. And then since it was leaking, it would come down and hit and discards another couple of tanks and bounce back up again. But it bounced up and all the way out into New Mexico, to Texas.
It's probably confusing to people because you didn't mention, this was a combination helium and hot air balloon. So all the propane was to do the hot air lifting.
It's called a rosier, but it's helium and it's augmented by hot air. So it's a combination, like Bert said, of helium and hot air.
We got time for maybe one more question. Who's got it? Got a hand
Yeah,
shot.
but the thing was, we took off, we're going around the world, and I didn't even get out of the county. And I looked at it as an opportunity for character development.
Hi, my name is Sam, and you and I met about a dozen years ago at Doc Berg's. And I had a question for you about going to the west. Wouldn't the winds have been more favorable if you'd gone eastbound?
Okay, now that is an excellent question, because the prevailing winds in the northern and southern hemisphere are all, well, the winds come from the west and they go to the east. That's the prevailing winds. However, looking at a satellite view of these weather satellites of the whole Earth, and I looked down there and there was another river, like a snake, right at the equator that was going backwards. And it's called the equatorial trade winds, right? The equatorial trade winds, and they're from the surface up to about 500 millibar. So if you climb higher than that, you will climb into turbulence and you climb into the winds that are going the other way. So, for 3 years on this project, I was going to go around the world just like you said, going towards the east. But then I found this river there, and so we took off from Mojave and we went south of Hawaii and picked up that snake of air that snakes away around the world. And I think, if I remember right, our average speed was, this is round numbers, Bert will beat me up again, but the round numbers for the whole flight was 110 miles an hour. And we had
a wind hill of average 7 knots on the tail, overall.
What was the overall tailwind?
The help that you got from the tailwind, overall, average 7 knots.
Okay, seven knots. I thought it was a little more than that. And I sure as hell was not going to argue with him. No, but we were fortunate to have good tailwind. And if you're going really slow, You know, sometimes we're indicating maybe 62 knots or less. And then you look out and the birds are going by. And for a guy that's used to flying supersonic jet fighters, the anxiety of trying to fly the airplane that slow, agonizingly slow. And the only way I could do that was I kept thinking about, Dick, you got a long ways to go. And you need to take care of every drop of fuel this airplane has on board. And just ignore the birds passing you up and continue to fly.
About 18 years later, for Steve Fawcett, I designed an airplane that flew around the world unrefueled, but it was pressurized. So if you're pressurized, you go that way. So that airplane, the global flyer, went to the east and Dick went to the west. Only because he wasn't pressurized. No, we couldn't afford that. And he couldn't get up into the good wind.
Wow.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're outside of the equatorial trade winds, then you can't go towards the west. But if you're outside of that, then you better go the other way, or else you will have headwinds by design. And let's see, he mentioned another airplane that flew around the world unrefueled. But you know something? He did it second. And nobody gives a crap about who does anything second.
That's an amazing moment to wrap it up. I want to say a couple things, and then we're going to have Dick selling and signing books. And as you guys probably have picked up too, his brother is here, Bert. We probably get a couple fun conversations running. I want to say thank you for coming. I haven't met some of you before, but I want to introduce myself really quick. My name is Nick. I'm the founder of Innovation Collective, and it was almost a decade ago. We had this crazy vision, and what the vision was that, you know what? I'm looking around seeing cities across America, and people aren't really innovating or creating or building meaningful things. And you look to Silicon Valley, and they were talking about these unicorn companies, like these fluffy things. It's like, all right, we can do better than that. Let's build things that really move society forward and add real value and beauty to the world. And I started scratching my head going, I bet there's a couple interesting mentors around town too, and fascinating people, but we should do these things called fireside chats to discover what's out there, what have our friends done. And it's so much fun to look 9.5 and 10 years into the future from where we've been. We've never once repeated a fireside chat guest. Not once. And I can see people in this room I still need to interview, and Kurt needs to interview for our fireside chats. And now we've taken what we do in this community, like this night. Did anybody else have fun tonight? Like, this is amazing. Most days, even if you didn't enjoy Dick, which was like ridiculous because everyone had a blast, you got at least a free beer, right? So mix those together, it's not a bad night. And you got to hear Dick get corrected by his little brother, which is even better too. So it's all those great moments of community. But I want to tell you more about IC for like 1 second, and then I'm done. If you don't know what we do, and this is your first time being here because you're like, this guy, he's here, let's come. Coming up next week on Wednesday morning, we have free coffee downstairs in a secret room behind a bookshelf that has a cigar room in it, and like old tables from the 1800s. And we gather in there to talk about our crazy ideas and then work on them. And we've produced in over a decade, easily over 100 companies in this community. We had a bunch of us that pooled money together and started investing in the really good ones. Those companies we invested in, they've created over 740 jobs for those companies, 350 patents. They went on to raise over $200 million. And this all started in this little town, now it's all over. It's in New York, it's in Florida, it's in Texas, Nevada. And it's just a bunch of crazy people because we believed that didn't matter how old you were or how little you were. Who's the youngest person in here? He's kind of young back there. How old were you, by the way? Ask the question. 12. Yeah, which is kind of awesome having a 12-year-old get to talk to Dick Rutan. Doesn't matter how old or young you are, though. Like, we believe that you still have magic in you and you have a role to play in the community. And that role is to get your big ideas out of you and to help other people get their big ideas out of them. So continue to participate. If you want to know about our Weird Nerd Tribe, just come be a part of it. Check it out. It's free next Wednesday, 7:30 in the morning, downstairs. If you're like, I don't know what it's about, again, you got a free beer tonight, you get a free coffee then. So it's not that bad. But we create companies, we fund companies, we build things that matter together. And we have a big festival coming up in April. We'll have about 30 different speakers and thinkers from around the world here. And in the past, these folks have come from all sorts of crazy companies. Tesla, lead engineers at Johns Hopkins. One of the gentlemen, he created brain-controlled robotics, which sounds crazy, but imagine applying it to people with no limbs. And that's his first application of it. So we have some crazies that show up to this thing, and we do it in this town, so come get involved, be a part of it. And if you're thinking, well, I'm not an entrepreneur, great, most of us aren't either, but we're all creators. And you're not a consumer. One of the things I hate the most is in society, somehow they convince the masses that their job is to be a consumer. That is not your birthright, that is not your brand. You're a creator, you're made to make things. So make them, get them out of you, come be a part of Innovation Collective. Get to know Kurt. This is Kurt, and Kurt runs this community here. She is the champion of all the nerds in North Idaho. And is here helping all of us. So give her around. Give Dick a round of applause.
He's being lame because he's embarrassed, but we have
I'm not embarrassed at all. I just feel like it wasn't the right moment.
It is. We have a promotional video about the Think Big Festival that we're very excited to show. Thanks to one of our gold sponsors, Blue Zone Marketing, right here in the den. And we're going to show it to you. It's like 2 minutes long. And you'll get more of a feel of what the Think Big Festival is about, hear the dates, know where to go, and get really pumped, because we're really pumped and we want you to be there. So.
Kurt, you'll give away 20 free tickets tonight.
Yep. If you come see me, I have 20 free tickets for you to be there.
Kurt, can you introduce Mike, your newest tenant?
Oh, yes.
Northwest Land Conservancy?
Yes, one of our newest tenants here in the building. If you don't know what's going on, we have over 60 offices in the Innovation Den, and tenants from all different kinds of companies. And one of our newest tenants is the Inland Northwest Land Conservation Group, Mike Crabtree, and so we're really excited to have them. Thanks, Sandy. Okay, here's the video. Hold on 1 second. Sorry. All right, 20 free tickets tonight for whoever comes to get it, and then after this is done, go grab a book and an autograph from Dick.
Hello, I'm Nick Smith. I'm the founder and CEO of Innovation Collective, and on April 13th through the 15th, you have a chance to come to Think Big Festival. Think Big is a one-of-a-kind opportunity to do exactly that. Think big. Look, we get it. You have big ideas, and that's why we started Think Big Festival, to help people like you get out of your head and do something with them. So what exactly happens at Think Big Festival? Over 3 days, April 13th to the 15th, we have 5 different experiences. First, we have our Sunset Reception, which is a cocktail party to welcome all the digital, tech experts and leaders to the town. Second, we have an industry think tank all around robotics and AI. It's attended by all these great minds that come to town, plus the local experts. Third is the Tech Carnival. Yes, you heard that right, Tech Carnival. Fourth, we have a speaker series where we bring together all the people who are from the think tank and the Sunset Reception. These are the big thinkers changing the industry around robotics, AI, machine learning, and venture capital. And fifth, we have an after party. Since it's a bonfire, all the speakers, the startups, engineers, entrepreneurs, and you get together. And the startups tell us what they're up to. All to say, a lot's going to happen, and you're not going to want to miss it because you get a chance to hang out with people like this.
Hi, my name is Jordan Kuzma. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Ocean Aerial, the world's first autonomous and underwater surface vehicle. We look to explore the world's oceans above, on, and below the surface. If you see me there, please come say hi.
So again, April 13th through the 15th, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Think Big Festival. Get your tickets at innovationcollective.co. I'll see you there.
And at the event, we give out an award, which is called the Rutan Confidence and Nonsense Award. it's for the most nonsensical idea or startup that actually is turning into a company and has potential. And the award, just so you know, is now given out in multiple states across the United States. And we have an interview I did with Bert at his home in his museum that we're gonna show at the event. But the award, you know what it is? It's Bert's ridiculously beautiful Idaho sideburn and Bert's ear bronzed. It's pretty ridiculous. So like Bert's ear is being passed out around the United States to people who are coming up with crazy ideas. Oh yeah, it's Bert's ear, it's legit. And like people win Bert's ear. So we're gonna do this forever. And yeah, it's complete bullshit and nonsense, and I love it. And because it inspires people to do crazy things like you two wild brothers. So all this to say, do crazy things, go big, live a life worth living, like because you're gonna die at some point, at least leave some sort of legacy behind. So with that said, go get books from Dick, say hi to Bert, say hi to big friends too.
Thanks everyone, have a good night.
Thank you. And do I think it's locked? Is it stopped?
I think so.
Okay.